When was the last time you used SMS to text your friends? For me, it's been over 5 years. I use apps like Discord, Twitter, and WhatsApp. SMS was a big part of my childhood, especially when I was growing up, but now I never touch it. So I thought to myself, what exactly happened to SMS? The short message service, SMS, was conceived in 1984, and the very first message was sent in 1992 saying Merry Christmas. Its development was a multinational project that resulted in an easy-to-use platform which could be used by every single phone line and network station. This allowed me to text anyone whenever I wanted, something I could never do before. But the initial rollout for this technology was quite slow at first, as back then it was seen more as a novelty than anything else. This was due to a lack of infrastructure and support for SMS at the time. It was only until the late 90s that I found myself using SMS, with phone brands like Nokia releasing the 9000i, as well as the SMS network itself expanding. Companies in Australia like Vodafone, Telstra, and Optus all commercialized and marketed the technology, giving rise to its popularity. SMS allowed people to send 160-character messages at 25 cents per message or more, depending on what provider you went with. The low maintenance cost of SMS also contributed to its success, with data companies being able to charge customers for text and the costs being next to nothing. At this point, everyone was using SMS to text each other. If I wanted to plan a date, or meet up with my friends, or even check in with my parents, it would all be through SMS. To make friends, I'd have to get a person's phone number, and this could be scary when talking to girls, but being able to communicate over SMS gave me so much freedom I never had before. My usage of SMS continued through the 2000s. I was using it every day to text my friends and ended up running through my credit instantly. I eventually had to ration how many texts I could send, as I could only send about 4 messages a day before running out of credit, and this meant that I had to cram as much detail as I could into every message. This forced me to make up acronyms to shorten my texts. The lack of alternatives also played a large part into the growth of SMS. There was no social media or any other messaging apps at the time, meaning that the only thing you could use was SMS. It was around that time that I got my very first Apple iPhone, and I started taking a lot more pictures and realized that I needed to get something better than traditional texting. On the computer, I was already using SMS Messenger and IRC to communicate with people. It was around 2008 that Apple released their App Store for their iPhones, and just 1 year later, apps like Twitter and WhatsApp arrived, and these completely changed the messaging landscape. Now, I didn't really need to cram every single detail to fit a character limit. There were no more messaging fees, meaning I could text as much as I want without having to spend money on SMS credit. I could now also send photos and memes to my friends, something that was never possible before because SMS data compression really turned most images into low quality things that no one could recognize. And it was at this point that the age of SMS was coming to an end. When I look back on what made a big impression to me, it was the fact that I was trying to write messages to friends, meaning adding short emojis to convey feelings, cutting down on words to create acronyms like LOL and ruffle so that I could stay within that character limit. And this felt especially true in an era where mobile phone plans just didn't have unlimited options. Most of my social interactions still occurred in real life, meaning that we weren't addicted to the algorithm of social media yet, and we weren't bombarded with notifications like we are now. However, now, SMS seems to be all but fading from mainstream usage. The real nail in the coffin came when technologies such as Imessage was released in 2011. This solidified a new change in the messaging space, as all my friends started to adopt Apple devices in order to get the free messaging via the iMessage platform. I would immediately know if someone had an iPhone or not based on the fact that their messages would come up blue or green. Blue of course being the free iMessage and green being the traditional SMS. And this of course created pressure to adopt iPhones and avoid the SMS charges that came along with the dreaded green bubble. It was almost like a status symbol. Along with iMessage, the new trend of the generation was Facebook. Facebook changed the landscape of how people shared information, from a single message to individuals to group messages on their profile. It was no longer about telling a friend about my day. Now I needed to share all about my day to all my friends. The more friends, the better. Facebook took this a step further, bringing out their own application for messaging, literally called Messenger. They took what was a small component of their Facebook platform and turned it into its own independent messaging app. I found that there were also other applications for messaging available now. My parents would particularly like Skype or Viber. My friends would use Facebook instead, and my children stuck to Snapchat and Instagram. Each generation seemingly had their own platform, and each platform had their own communities and audiences. businesses. So then, what was left for SMS? Well, I took a step back and looked at my SMS messaging history, and all I could see were reminders for missed business calls and voicemails. I saw booking alerts for the dentist, reminders for my optometrist that I'm overdue for a check-in. Swiping down further, I saw numerous verification codes and of course advertisements. Everything made sense now. The answer was simple. SMS and traditional messaging is now business oriented. While we might not use SMS to text our friends and family anymore, it's still integrated into everyone's mobile phone use. And this makes sense. It's still a form of actively contacting an individual because SMS always brings up a notification. This is why there are entire business platforms centered around SMS. Companies such as Twilio, allowing you to build applications around the technology. It can automate messages, create reminders, integrate SMS into applications, and much more. For example, stores here like JB Hi-Fi use SMS to send digital receipts. This allows me to easily refund items without needing a physical receipt. And Amazon deliveries use the technology to send alerts for a generation that's always stuck on their phones and opt in to buy online instead of in-store. Even government bodies like the Australian Police Force use SMS to send missing person reports to surrounding areas. And these are just a few examples, but it made me realize that the technology is more prevalent in our lives than I thought. If anything, SMS is more powerful today than any other form of messaging. With such a tool, it only makes sense as to why businesses try to use SMS for marketing and communication. However, a majority of them fail to maximize SMS's full potential, using insufficient systems and failing to optimize their strategies around SMS. This is why companies such as Twilio have been so successful in their SMS space, helping other businesses reprogram their SMS system for efficient use. Now, you might be wondering what Twilio actually is. Well, it's a flexible API that brands and businesses can use of all sizes to engage. Its ease of use is something that I consider a major advantage to business, and especially for developers, where you don't need to build an SMS system from scratch, then decode all the bugs and try to optimize it a million times over. And before I found out about Twilio, being able to send SMSs through an API was something I never knew I could even do. I thought such a task would be complex, difficult, hard to create and use, especially as a developer. However, I got the chance to try out their application last year. I literally only needed 3 lines of code to create a functional script to automate SMS messaging. My first line of code was to authenticate the token. My second was to import the library. And my third was to write the function that sends the message. Being able to send and reply to SMS text is a blessing in itself. With other applications, you need to unlock your phone before you can even send that. SMS is unique. You can call up Siri, reply to a message, or even let someone know you're running 5 minutes late while driving without having to check or unlock your phone. It's also tweaked to create an efficient platform that engages potential and existing customers. I would be able to use their mobile phone to help them authenticate their login credentials, or to reset their password, or even to send them marketing advertising. And I can now see why it's so important to be able to collect someone's phone number along with their email address when they're signing up for a future SaaS product that I might make. And what makes Twilio an interesting company is that it's just a tool at your disposal, just like any other. A shovel isn't that useful in a house, but when you need to do some gardening, it gets the job done. Twilio is like a shovel for SMS. They are also sponsoring this video, helping make it happen, as well as others on this channel. So I'd be pretty happy if you check them out if you're planning to do SMS in a project of yours. I of course have a coupon code that gets you a discount to use their service, and it's here in the description below the video. Getting back to SMS and its future, the narrative seems to have changed over the years, going from being one of the newest technologies in town to slowly fading away to the background and now coming back in a new space. And one thing for certain is that SMS's future is here to stay now, serving a pretty important purpose for business. Although after all this research, I had come to one answer for my question. SMS didn't really go away. Its target audience has changed and adapted. During the last few years of COVID, there was even a rise in the SMS as businesses had to adapt to working remotely. Now, when I have to do a job interview, I get a reminder sent by SMS. When I log into my bank for business to do accounting, I need to verify with an SMS code. And if I ever want to make a product and engage with customers, it would be through SMS. With an abundance of applications and notifications that are ignored or disabled, or even when emails might only be checked once a day, SMS now is the only true way to immediately and directly message an individual and get their attention.